I'm super excited to have Molly Wood, host of the Everybody in the Pool podcast, which I love that title, Molly. It's a great title for a podcast.
Thank you.
And the podcast is really good. I mean, no surprise. You've been doing this for a long time in terms of just broadcasting, but I listened to your conversation with the CEO of Trace Genomics, and that was a really good conversation. I just love the polish on it. You're great at questioning. So everyone who listens to this show should go listen to your show. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
But we're here to talk about the news of the week. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about, your conversation with, it's Purnima.
Purnima. Yep.
And this whole idea of genomics is really fascinating to me. I think it's just continuing to be more important. Dave Freeberg, head of, he was the original kind of OG ag tech unicorn. He's actually heading up Ohalo now. There's just a lot of action in the space. And so this was a really timely interview for me, but what did you take away from that conversation with her?
Yeah, it's sort of a delightful accident that I ended up publishing that episode this week when we're having this conversation. The podcast, just so everybody knows, is about climate solutions writ large. And so the idea is to find these innovators and entrepreneurs and brilliant people who are coming up with solutions, either because they're way smarter than I will ever be, or because they're practitioners in the space already. And so this is one of the things I've really been trying to do this year is a lot more on food and agriculture, which are not always the same thing. And this company, Trace Genomics, is, it's this kind of interesting multi-layered thing. It's like, on the one hand, you have agriculture, which is obviously a massive contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. It's super climate intensive to grow food and animals to feed us. Also, you have the climate crisis getting worse, and that makes food and animals harder to grow because there is, less predictable weather. There's more drought, there's more rain, there's more pests. Like a lot more bugs is a big part of the climate crisis. There's a lot more disease. And you have the last 10 or 20 years in which we've figured out how to map the genome super inexpensively. And so these companies are coming along, and this was a big part of what Freeberg has been working on, and precision ag as a field, digital agriculture as a field, coming along and saying, wow, we can really get granular in terms of soil health and seeds and what's going to grow better when. And it's still, what I found so interesting about this interview is that it's this next generation technology that didn't even exist a couple of decades ago, but combined with like, I want to say the world's oldest profession, but I know that has some shades to it.
That's
but
something else,
combined with growing food, which is slow and risky, and it's just a really interesting, complicated space.
Yeah, it is. And we're going to get into one of the later stories about how, for example, Google's taken a big interest in how we grow food and applying some of their key technologies there. But I want to talk a little bit before that. I actually had a conversation with the CEO of Prolific Machines. Have you talked to them yet? They are this company that, as you probably have witnessed, the cultivated meat space has been struggling pretty prolifically. And this company actually, they came out with their big funding round about a month ago, and they're using precision light, instead of like traditional growth media molecules. They're using precision light to turn on and off the receptors to grow meat in these bioreactors. And they think because of the ability to apply digital precision to growth as opposed to floating a bunch of molecules in a big pool, that they think this is going to be much more affordable and much more basically a way to get over all the problems the cultivated meat companies have been having. And so he says he's been talking to the cultivated meat companies and also big meat companies, and they're all excited about it. But anyway,
fascinating.
You should definitely check them out. They're really interesting.
I will. I love that. I'm all in on cultivated meat, honestly. Like, Petri meat is the future, people. Just get on board.
Get on board.
We'll be talking about
meat or
it
clean
in
meat
the
or whatever.
Yeah. I think we have a story about it later on. Yeah.
But a nice segue to the first story based on your last podcast is there's a story this past week about how these researchers out of Tel Aviv University have found out how to grow tomatoes that consume less water using genomics. So they essentially used gene editing to remove a gene called ROP9, ROP9, which essentially acts as a switch that toggles the plants between an active and inactive state. And because they can do this, they can essentially partially close this tomato's plant stomata, which is essentially the water gate, I think, that allows them to retain more water. I thought that was really interesting, but it's just kind of what we've been seeing for the past couple of years, Molly. I mean, been following a company called Pairwise, where they served up gene edited mustard greens that tasted good. And I think they just came out with their pitless cherries. So there's all sorts of really interesting stuff going on here. So cultivated meat is definitely the future, but I think gene edited food is going to be a big part of the future.
I really do. And it's such, obviously, it's such an interesting and somewhat fraught conversation. And people, kind of who think of themselves as healthy and environmentalists are against genetically modified food. And we find ourselves in the midst of an interesting evolution where the fact is we are going to need to modify food more and more and more to get it to grow in hospitable conditions and to continue to feed all the people on earth. I was actually thinking of this startup called Alora that is based in Canada that you should totally talk to. And they've genetically edited rice plants to be more salt tolerant so that you could grow rice. Because right now, rice is just this unbelievably inefficient crop, right? It takes tons and tons of water and land, and yet it is fully a staple food. They're figuring out how to grow it in deltas that are primarily flooded with salt water and potentially even on floating rice paddies in the ocean.
Oh my goodness. That's super cool because I just was talking about how rice has arsenic in it. Do you guys know about this?
Yeah,
it's not cool. And I like eat rice all the time, but like why? Because what you're just saying, Molly, is where they grow it. It's the actual soil in which they grow it. So we could get rid of arsenic in rice.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. Like get rid of arsenic in rice and also all of the land and water. I mean, water is just going to be such a big deal.
Yeah. And all of the land and all the water. Yeah.
All of the land and all of the water. But 100%, right? Like when you start to look at how are we going to grow crops in 150-mile-an-hour winds? How are we going to grow different kinds of crops in places?
Higher heat temperatures, less water, the water's drying up. And I think like your podcast and just generally people talking about it are an important part of the conversation because there's so much misinformation about things like gene editing. Because I think just GMO, for example, just has a painted with a bad brush here in the US, Europe as well. And a lot of it's just misinformation. People just don't understand it and they don't understand that GMO is some of the healthiest food out there. And so I think there's the same scariness for people. Gene editing. Oh no, you're getting in there using these virtual scissors to cut a section of the DNA out. But I think if they learn more about it, hopefully they'll accept that this is actually probably safer or better for them.
I hope so. I mean, if you look up all of the hormones and bleach and pesticides that are part of part of all of the meat that you're all eating, like I think you would start to go, actually, wait, so you're telling me that the alternative is like a pluot, which is also a genetically modified food that's delicious.
The thing is, because it's more about just like knowledge and wanting fear of change, right? People are like, gene editing, it just sounds crazy. Or like you said, Mike, like GMO. But like, man, we already put a bunch of bad stuff in food. So
and the thing about
we should just edit it.
Yeah. And gene editing in particular, right, is essentially the destination you'd get at with traditional breeding of plants over like a 10 to 20 year time horizon. It's just accelerating it much more quickly.
Yeah.
And so GMO is a little bit different. You can insert a foreign DNA strand in there, but with gene editing, at least as defined, I think in the US, it's essentially where you get with traditional plant breeding, but just quicker. So, but let's move on to the next story. I don't know if you have a mill, Molly. I've been using a mill here at home for some time. The mill story is fascinating to me because I was very much focused on the smart home for a long time. I had a smart home podcast and they were pretty seminal people in that space. And that Matt Rogers was a co-founder of Nest, which I think was one of the big stories in the smart home. And so when they decided that they wanted to look at home composting and food waste management, that was pretty exciting to me because and people hear me rail about this all the time. The home food waste management story has not had enough innovation. I think there's a lot of innovation happening around food waste reduction in the retail space, at the farm, in the food supply chain, but in the home, like it feels like we're still kind of stuck like in a 20-year, 30-year time frame. So the mill was exciting. And so the story is that they just unveiled some results. They've been doing a study or they've been doing a pilot with the city of Tacoma here in Washington State, where they basically are giving some of the Tacoma folks a mill. And surprise, surprise, it really does dramatically change the behavior of people who are using the pilot test units. people who are using a mill in their home. For people who don't know, it's essentially a food recycler or food composter. They've separated 10 times more food scraps than the average Tacoma household. And 84% of people respondents to the survey said that they're putting now 0 food scraps in the trash after having a mill at home. What I like about the mill just generally is it's in my house, it gets rid of the stink factor of composting, but also what I see here, I'm seeing people like change their behavior.
Yeah. This data is amazing. I think a lot of us have been waiting for this to come out for exactly the reasons that you say. I do have a mill, and there are certain things that I wish were more flexible about it. The fact that I put food scraps in it and then I take it out once a month.
It's crazy how much you could put in there.
A game changer. Because previously I just had a little plastic IKEA bucket that sat on my countertop.
The gross
and
bucket.
It's disgusting. The gross bucket is disgusting. And
the stinky bucket with the fruit flies and all that.
Fruit flies. And so, it is absolutely game changing. It does exactly what it says it's going to do. And then the awareness that it creates around wasted food for people who weren't already composting, even people who were, is incredible. And the idea that the results of some of their data is that what they found is that people were buying less. People were like, oh, it turns out I'm wasting too much food. And so I will maybe not buy as much. And then their garbage bins were basically empty because most of what had been going in there was gross, stinky food with fruit flies. And even like, I'm so happy about my compost. I live in Oakland where we have curbside compost. But even my compost bin would get so disgusting and maggoty. And now I'm just, I've only had maggots once. Don't judge me. I took it as like a personal
I'm not judging
failing.
you. I'm judging you. And by the way, everyone listening, we are not getting paid by Mill. This is not a paid promotion. It's actually a good product. We're fans of it.
Yeah, it's really smart. And it's smart in that it is, I should probably disclose that Mill was an advertiser on the show. I had Matt Rogers on, and then they became an advertiser on Everybody in the Pool for a little while, but not anymore. So this is the true opinion after having been using it for 4 or 5 months. Yeah, I think that the other thing that's so smart about it is that it is sort of an aspirational product in terms of its design. Like, it's so important that Matt had that Nest DNA and the kind of design factor. It is a very expensive device. I have no problem with that. We all have worked in technology. Like, we all know that that's how the adoption curve works. Things come out really expensive and they get cheaper over time. But everybody who walks into my house looks at that. I had a Super Bowl party last year, and all the women at the party were just gathered around the mill.
Really?
Talking about it.
Yeah, that's funny.
I mean, just my wife,
a bunch of ladies being like, what does it do?
Yeah. Understandably, my wife is just sick of me bringing home gadgets. I mean, I run an event called the Smart Kitchen Summit. So like, I'm almost forbidden at this point to bring stuff home. And so when I got that, she's like, what is this? And about now she's like the biggest fan of this thing. So to convert her over, I think like really symbolizes this thing.
And by the way, you got to send some of those devices my way. Like if you have too many, Tiff doesn't want them in the house, like over here.
My garage is a graveyard of of Smart Kitchen food products. So I probably should send some your way.
I hope you're taking them to electronics recycling. Don't.
Electronics recycling is Carlos.
Carlos is I mean, do you want to I have like 2 Pico brews, like home beer brewing appliances. The company's out of business. Do you want one? Yeah.
Anyways,
I'll send one your way. All right, let's move on to the next story. This one was interesting in that Meatly, which is a company that makes cultivated meat-based pet food based out of the UK, had some big news over the past weekend that they got approval by the Food Standards Agency, which is essentially the group within the UK that approves. It's like our FDA or USDA essentially says, hey, this thing could be eaten by the public. They approved Meatly's product to be eaten and sold to animals so they can sell cultivated meat, I think just in the UK. And this is actually the first time a cultivated meat company has been approved to sell in Europe. Now, granted, the UK is no longer part of the European Union, but technically I would consider UK part of Europe. And this is the first company. So were you surprised by this, Molly, or just, hey, this is probably a logical first step into the first toe in the pool?
I think it's nice. Love it. Roll with the metaphor. It feels like a big deal. I think that the more sort of steps toward approval, the closer we get to normalizing. I actually think it's very clever in some ways of them to have started with pet food, because it's sort of, you could see people kind of being like, well, I mean, people get a little nutty about their pets, don't get me wrong, but you could see people saying, I feel comfortable feeding this to my pet. And also, I call myself kind of a half-assed vegan. And one of the reasons that I will find it hard to have a 100% vegan household is I have 2 dogs. And I'm like, well, what are they supposed to eat? I'm not giving them carrots. Like, that's not cool. They're supposed to eat meat. So I think it's a smart kind of go-to-market strategy for the company. And it's also a nice interim step when it comes to approval and consumer acceptance.
I have been completely side conversation, but I actually, in the last 2 months, our little Pomeranian kind of was getting sick. It's losing his hair. It has alopecia. So we decided to use Farmer's Dog.
Yeah.
That subscription service you hear about on all the podcasts. And like, by the way,
it works.
You go from, they love it. He loves it. But you go from dry food to the stuff that's tasty and then real meat. And like my dog's waking me up at 4:30 in the morning to eat, which is like the annoying side effect of like tasty food for dogs.
It's so funny because I had a Farmer's Dog for years. I know we're off on a tangent, but and then I was like, I can't with all this plastic. It was killing me that it comes in these little plastic sleeves. And I was like, oh. And so I switched to some dehydrated stuff that was still fancy, and I was mixing it up, and it was like a nightmare. And my dogs were like, this is fine, but we don't really.
That's how they sounded.
It's not quite the same. And now this is fine. That's how one of them sounds. And the other one sounds like a little like Boston mafioso.
Can we hear that? Can we hear that dog or no?
That goes.
Is it offensive? Take it out if it's offensive. Yeah, no. The other one is
Boston.
Like, the other one is like the thing I always say is that he's always like, "Don't touch me." What are you doing? What is with this food right now? I love the Farmer's Dog. You bring me this other crap.
Who cares about the plastic waste? Yeah, I don't care about. I don't mix this powder food up. I want.
Yeah, work it out.
Sounds like a New Yorker too, just like a New Yorker dog. Like, listen, I'm walking here. Well, that's a stereotype.
He's like, I'm walking here, dog. And then the other one's like, I mean, I'll eat whatever you give me because it's out of the street. But I got Ridwell. I've layered solutions. And now that I have Ridwell for plastic recycling, I have gone back to the Farmer's Dog. And damn it, if my dogs are not, in fact, happier and healthier.
I have Ridwell, but I didn't even think about putting that plastic because you do have to kind of wash it off, the plastic, and put it in the Ridwell bin.
It's
I love Ridwell, by the way. Ridwell's another.
Welcome back to the Dogcast.
Yeah,
the
Dogcast.
And for that, just so you know,
Joe,
I make a lot of AI images and just like the inevitable, which is there's cultivated meat, but it's being served by a robot. So there you just close the loop.
There we go. No. The future has arrived.
The future is there.
The future.
Next story.
We're going to show my screen because it kind of.
Right.
So
I'll get that.
I don't know if you follow restaurant tech too much, Molly, but I thought this video, and for those listening, will kind of try to narrate. But the story here is essentially that the founder of Chipotle, Steve Ells, pretty iconic restaurant founder because Chipotle's been such a big growth story over the past couple of decades in terms of fast casual. You know, he's no longer with the company, and his new concept, he decided to start a new chain, was essentially built around a restaurant robot concept. And so he started this company called Kernel, and he had this idea that he'd do a robot-powered restaurant, essentially have like one robot and 3 employees in the back of house, no one in the front of house, essentially these little cubbies that would serve up these food bowls or sandwiches, whatever. And lo and behold, surprise, surprise, he kind of realized that maybe he needs a little more humans because people don't necessarily like completely humanless front of houses. And so he was quoted about a month or two back on a podcast. They also shut down the New York location to retool it. And his quote was, I thought we could have 3 people in back, no people up front, and the customers would just know how to use the app and they would know how to use the cubbies and they wouldn't want to interact with people. And I got it wrong. So, you know, is often you don't see a founder admit they're wrong because it seems like it's kind of like they're allergic to that.
True.
And B, it's really these restaurant robot concepts is very hit or miss. And these guys that are just kind of spinning up completely robotic restaurant concepts, I've yet to see one that has completely hit out of the park. What do you think of Kernel?
I will say I agree with you, and kudos to Steve for understanding that this was not the right move and and trying to fix it. I also think that there's just a level of assumed knowledge. And it's easy to fall into this trap. I mean, the founder of Chipotle is not necessarily like a tech bro. And so it's somewhat surprising that he fell into that trap of thinking, oh, everybody understands how to use apps, or everybody understands how to walk in and use a QR code, or just doesn't want to see a person because they don't like people. We're all animals. We are social animals. Like the idea of staffing the back, and I think those restaurants creep people out because there aren't any people. Right. So it just feels not right, like uncanny valley.
Yeah.
But I also think that on some level, and I'm curious about your thoughts about this, I feel like on some level, I walk into a place like that and I'm like, this feels gross. This feels like you trying to not employ humans. I think there's like a built-in kind of yuckiness factor to it that's just like, oh, you wish you had free unpaid labor, and so you've made a robot only restaurant, and this could be somebody's job. And even if you don't think that super explicitly, you have that vibe that it feels somehow exploitative or just not quite right. It's just not right.
I just thought of something.
People share food with each other.
I agree 100%. But I just thought of something. Remember that thing? Was it in the 50s? They had where they had the little doors. You just take the food out of automats. So we did do that once.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know how. Yeah, but I don't know how widespread it was back then.
We did it in 2017. Dave Freeberg tried to start Eatsa.
Right.
And essentially Eatsa was in New York, and it had little kind of automated cubbies and pizza and robots in the back. And this essentially almost sounds like the same concept. And Eatsa essentially got shut down. So, I mean,
Little Caesars has it, but I'm not going to tell you how I know that.
Oh,
because you go to
Little Caesars now has like a little. They have a little. I just know people who go to Little Caesars sometimes.
I'm sure.
And they have a little warmer thing, and you can like order ahead and just go grab it out of that little refrigerator.
Yeah.
But it's combined with people at the checkout station, and the vast majority of people are at the individual cashier because nobody can figure out the little like reverse cooler.
Situation. I mean, I think we should learn from grocery stores, right? Like, I think there's the self checkout for people who want the accelerated get back to work phase. And then I like to actually go to, Carlos has made fun of me. I like to go to the cashier. I like to talk to them. And so like, I feel like and maybe some days I'm busy. Some days I'm in a hurry. I got to get back. I'm making a cake. I have guests coming over. I'll go through the self checkout, but sometimes I just like to talk to the cashier. Yeah. I feel like we should learn from that when we look at these restaurants.
I also kind of like to be taken care of a little bit at the, there's something nice about going through. It's true. Like, I mean, I do 10 trillion things a day, and it is nice to go to the grocery store and have a nice person, they swipe the thing and we chat, and then someone else puts it in a bag for me. And I'm just like, this is nice. This is like caretaking.
That's interesting. Yeah. The service part of it.
Yeah. I'm such a girl on the show today.
No, I agree. I mean, I think, well, there's been lots of speculation by me and others about like, does the restaurant ultimately get taken over by technology and like robots take over? Whether or not that happens, I always think there's going to be people who want to go to this white glove, nice restaurants, have an actual human wait on you, because that's a nice experience. Like that's something we've all grown up with, and we like talking to people. I like asking them what meals they like. That's just great.
Yep. And it's such a profoundly human interaction to break bread with people. It does not feel right. Just on a like molecular level, it does not feel right to have a bloodless robot just hand you a box of things and then you leave and be burp, burp, burp. Like that's not the way I'm about.
I think the myth though is that it has to be either or, right? And we bring this up on the show a lot. Like technology is hand in hand with everything that we're doing. And so we just got to find that balance. And I think when you think of it as an either or, that's when you get afraid and you're like, well, I don't want that, bloodless, by the way. I'm going to coin that. That's a great term for robots. They don't have any blood. But yeah, I think that's what it is. I think that's what it is.
Not yet.
You can have both. Not yet. That's true. Not yet. That's true.
By the way, we're watching the show, the show Sunny, which has a robot at the whole center of it. So we should have an after hours talk about the
Sunny. It's on Apple TV.
Okay, thank you. Good recommendation.
It's about a robot.
Final story of the day is Google-backed Kroppen has launched their AI-powered Sage platform. And this was an interesting story in and of itself, in that this company is saying that they want to essentially map the entire world's agriculture, 4.8 billion hectares worldwide. That would factor in weather conditions, soil quality, water availability, socio-political developments, and farm conditions, and factor all that in and have the AI kind of compute and tell people where the best places are in terms of a macro global environment. But set against the backdrop of another Google, essentially a Google spin out mineral AI winding down. I don't know if you just saw the announcement about 2 weeks ago. The CEO of Mineral essentially said, hey, we gave it a year. We're winding this down. And they're basically giving the technology or licensing it to Driscoll's. It just kind of shows me like things are really hit or miss. Like we've seen, companies try to apply AI to ag. And I thought like, if Google is spinning in this mineral out, they obviously know AI. They're doing robotics here. This has a lot of potential, but it didn't win. It wasn't successful, but cropping is one that essentially Google thinks has a better shot. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, or you interviewed folks in the space, Molly, but I'd kind of love to hear your thoughts on what's going on here.
Well, it's interesting because it sort of goes back to what we were saying about trace genomics, right? That you can apply this like really advanced technology, but at the end of the day, there are so many factors to life. And if you're a farmer and you're trying these things, you get 1, maybe 2 shots a year to figure out if it works. And, even when you look at soil sequestering carbon, it's a 5 to 10 year process to improve soil's sequestration capabilities. It is, even if you're able to learn, even if this company is able to snapshot every single thing about every crop in the world right now, doesn't it sort of feel like everything about those crops will have changed by tomorrow, especially in a climate that's changing in ways that we are unable to predict, which is, to be clear, the scariest part about climate change. So I guess I think it's just like anything. It's just like robots in restaurants. There's only so much technology you can apply because at the end of the day, growing things is biology, and it is about as complicated as it gets.
Yeah. I'm interested to see how predictive the AI gets over time as the data set grows and has it over a time sequence. But I think you're totally right on that. Like it might be completely different just a week from now. I think like companies like Trace though, like getting into the DNA of the soil and the advancements we've had in that technology, I think that's going to be hugely impactful for farmers. And I think that whole revolution is just beginning.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really true. And I don't mean to discount even what CropIn's doing either. This is all very valuable. It's sort of like medicine in humans. It's not perfect and we haven't cured every disease yet, but we have done phenomenal things and there are incredible advances available. It's just like, I always want to temper it with the reality of life and weather and the planet just being complex beasts.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Well, speaking of beasts and complexity, my last AI picture of the day.
oh, biscuits. Whoa, boy.
A little scary. This could maybe help with.
I can already tell that this Molly is not going to like this. By the way, she's definitely. I wouldn't say maybe you are anti-robot, Molly, or you get creeped out.
Well, it's an unnerving picture. I know.
It's a pretty unnerving picture. Yeah, I'm pro automation. There's definitely stuff I want to be automated, but I don't want its one eyeball to look at me like that.
Or
just one. Did you see the way the one?
Face.
No, it was just the one eyeball was like, look at that. See? It's Mona Lisa.
Oh, I see. Wow, I didn't see that before. That's a little more scary now.
Uh-huh.
All right, there you go.
But definitely pick the crops because look at all the states that got rid of heat and water protections for their workers. Yes, please make that a robot. Love it.
Good robot.
Just don't look at me like that.
Just don't do the one eye thing.
Well, Molly, where can people find out more about you? I mean, obviously, check out the podcast, Everybody in the Pool. But what else are you up to, and what can people find out about what you're doing?
Yeah, everybodyinthepool.com is the home of the website. I am primarily these days on Instagram and Threads at Mollywood Pro. I am also the host with my eternal co-host, Tom Merritt, of my favorite, don't tell anybody, my secret favorite podcast, It's a Thing, where we are just doing delightful trend spotting week after week. And I also currently am the host of a podcast for Microsoft about AI and the future of work that is called Work Lab. Yeah.
That is so cool. You have your toes in all. I keep going back to this. You have your toes in all the different pools.
I'm
And
all in.
by the way,
I'm in the deep end.
You're all in. I was actually on Tom's podcast last Friday on his DTNS. And I
Yes.
always love to get on. He's such a pro, by the way. Like you are too. Like, man, it's hearing him, see him go with that machine. He's just great. So
he's magical. Tom really, I mean, I can sit here and say I do 3.5 podcasts because there's another one that's on hiatus right now. Tom's like, well, here are my 37 podcasts that I managed to do every single week. He is a machine. He's incredible.
He's a machine. Well, I think your next podcast is going to be you doing dog voices. And
don't touch me.
Oh yeah, I'm in on that.
reading the news in dog voices. I'm looking forward to that one.
The Reggie and Milo cast I'm in. Thanks so much for having me, you guys. This is so fun.
Yeah, this is
Thanks
fun. Make sure you
here.
come back sometime. We'd love to have you back, but this is great. Thank you, Molly.
Bye, guys.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye.